Greetings everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Blessing Kumbu, your host, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about something that I think is long overdue, which is mental health in academia. Not the high reels of like being a student is nice, but the late nights, the self-doubts, feeling like you don't belong. And I am joined today by an amazing guest. It's a friend of mine, Dr. Haley Terms, and we're going to walk through, she's a staff member now, but we're going to walk through like her journey as a student and how she dealt with mental health, and I'll also be sharing my own experience. How are you today, Haley?
Hi, very well. All the better for seeing you, Blessing.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a wonderful conversation.
No, I'm honored to be here. It's an important message.
Okay, cool. So normally before we start, we like to break the ice so that we flow nicely into the conversation. So just a nice few questions that I'm going to ask you.
Shoot.
Okay, cool. First one. Think back to when you were a student.
Okay.
So then rate your student sleep schedule out of 10.
Ooh, as in 10 is very good sleep.
Yes.
No, I am like sleep is king. 7, 8.
Okay.
Me, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then finish the sentence. My student budget was so tight that...
Ooh, that I took a part-time job in the faculty during my PhD, and then no more work got done.
Ish. Okay, cool. And then what is the most unhinged thing you told yourself to get through a tough semester?
Ooh. I honestly don't think I told myself anything unhinged. I think whatever gets you through is helpful, maybe only in the short term, and you maybe need to reevaluate it for the long term. But no, the mantra I kept coming back to was I'm scrappy. That was like my little phrase, was like, I'm scrappy, whatever comes at me, okay, I can figure this out. So I don't think it was unhinged.
Okay.
Yeah, I stand by it.
Okay, cool. And then when you were a student, what song was basically your student anthem?
Oh. This is a tricky question, because it's like, is it about the theme of the song or just one that was around a lot in the time? So I was a student for like 11 years, tertiary education, right? So you're asking me like a decade of my life,
yes,
which is like 2 separate music genres then. And I can't remember what songs were. Oh, you know what I remember?
Yes.
I remember when I was a first year and I walked through the food court for the first time, and they had a music video playing on the screen, and it was Taylor Swift's first, that like love story one.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, oh, this is garbage. And now I love Taylor Swift. So, you know, what can change in a decade?
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, music tastes, they always change most of the time. Okay, cool. 2 last questions. Okay. So now, myth or fact? You can always tell when someone is struggling with their mental health.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Yeah.
And then myth or fact? You have to hit rock bottom before you seek help.
No. And I'm a big believer in seeking help, because sometimes if you're kind of a bit meh, you can carry on being a bit meh for your whole life and miss out on joy.
Yes.
And, you know, you don't have to be like unable to leave your bed and, you know, with a duvet around you for you to seek mental help and actually start enjoying your life more. Like, definitely that's available at any point.
That is true.
Yeah.
And I think, it's just a mental shift. I think a lot of people don't really understand. It's more difficult to ask for help.
Yeah.
And asking for help is a sign of courage and not weakness.
Absolutely. And I think we also are shifting from like mental health to mental wealth. And like, it might not be about, oh, you're the worst you've ever been in your whole life. It might be like, well, if I went to therapy or tried a medication, maybe I would be like a way, way better version of myself and be much happier and actually protect my like mental welfare. And like, it could be a cheat code for actually becoming the best you can be.
That is true. Yeah. Okay, so maybe now as we slide into the conversation, I know it's like 11 years ago, but let's go back to when you were a student.
Yeah.
Overall, how was your student experience?
Right. So undergrad. So it's kind of coming in, I would say that I'm not like a top student. I didn't get A's easily. I was like a solid C student. I had to work very hard. I can't cram learn. It's just not something that is possible for my brain. So I had to work very hard in undergrad to get where I needed to go. And so I think with that came a lot of anxiety. I tend to be quite an anxious person. And anxiety in a prolonged form then leads to depression, because essentially your brain is exhausted and so it shuts you down. But I was managing just at a sort of high level of anxiety for most of my undergraduate, and my honors was a very stressful year. And I also, because I transitioned from doing a BSc on upper campus to a BSc medical honors, which means not that you're doing medicine or anything like that, you're doing scientific research at medical school. And I was doing, a very techniques heavy project. I was working with animals. I was, doing a lot of lab techniques. I was having to do long hours in the lab, as well as do the write-up and the science and the analyzing.
It's really stressful.
It is. And then I sort of carried a similar project over to my master's, and my master's took me just over 2 years. I remember applying for an extension of 3 months. And I think the master's was the point where I broke, so to say. I felt like it pushed me over some physiological cliff. You could call it, where just suddenly the anxiety was uncontrollable. Like I couldn't rein it back in easily or myself. And then what made it worse was that I didn't take a break after master's. I went straight into a PhD.
Don't want peace. I want problems always.
Because I hadn't seen anything inspiring around me that I wanted to do for my PhD. And then a researcher came back from overseas and started a lab. And I was like, wow, if he's going to start a lab, he's not going to be able to take many students. I have to get in there, and I have to get in there now. And there's no time to waste. And I was just like, go, go, go. And so I said, do you want a PhD student? And he said, absolutely. And so I dove straight in and started my PhD in July. When I really should have rested, and that was when I really wasn't okay. Was that transition from master's to PhD?
Okay, and then so when you realized now that you are not okay, was it easier for you to share the experience with someone, or did it take you quite a long time that you just kept it to yourself and tried to make it through?
No, I mean, I didn't share it with anyone, because I didn't even realize what was happening, because I was so in the experience, and because things had been tough for a while. Academics is demanding, doing a thesis is very demanding. I had gotten used to these levels of stress that were so high that how it just happens incrementally every day, and you don't notice that you're like the frog in the boiling pot. It's just happening to you. And so if I could have like body swapped myself from undergrad straight into my post-master's self, I think I probably would have been like, whoa, this body does not feel okay. But I hadn't noticed. And so I was just doing the best I could do. I was trying to get up in the morning. I was going to the lab. I was getting very down and very frustrated when experiments weren't working. I remember crying a bunch of times, like in the lab, like late at night, no one's there, and you're just bawling your eyes out. But we all cry in the lab. Everyone cries in the lab. If they tell you they haven't, something. But it was really my PhD supervisor who realized I wasn't okay, and started to make that realization more and more obvious, let's say.
Okay, so maybe if we can frame it on like your supervisor realizing, okay, something is wrong. I know like for most students, when we step into like postgrad, especially like if you're in a competitive program like neuroscience, whereby there's intensive lab work, long hours in the lab, optimizing protocols, working, mental breakdowns and all those things. Sometimes it's quite difficult as a student to connect with your supervisor to that level, to tell them, oh, actually, I think we should slow down because you are worried, oh, I need to finish this in 2 years. My master's, I need to, my supervisor needs data. And I also feel like for supervisors, it's quite easy for them to miss that
Yeah.
oh, Haley's not doing well,
Yeah.
because they only see you come into the lab doing this, doing that, and you also get afraid to share it, and like, can you slow down a bit?
Yeah.
So what would be your advice to supervisors on just like trying to keep track of,
Yeah.
okay, this person has been working too hard, they need
Yes.
to slow down,
Yes.
and also not what can supervisors do so that as students we don't feel like we always have to deliver, like you need data.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
make sure that you get the data.
There's a lot in what you've just said, and I think, so just to unpack it a little bit in terms of my experience, I'd say the first thing is that, like in the beginning of my PhD, I wasn't working all that hard. I was working a normal amount, but I was getting overly pessimistic and knocked down when an experiment wouldn't work, when I'm learning a new technique and I can't get it, because I think I was so fragile, but I didn't know that, and I was just really beating myself up for not getting this faster, and I was just very fortunate to have the supervisor that I had, who would just drop into conversation. When I was at Oxford and I was super depressed and really suicidal, I found that, and he would just, he would throw in sentences like that, which just made it like okay to be not okay. Like it kind of normalized that he was a human, he had gone through something like this, and I wouldn't say I was actually at that point. I wasn't ideating about suicide. I was just so deeply in it and just sort of, I don't know, begrudgingly like, well, this is my life, and just wake up and trudge every day. But I wouldn't say I was happy. I was deeply depressed at the time. So he would drop a lot of those things into conversation, and he was the one eventually who sort of said, I sort of then got brave enough to sort of ask him about some mental health stuff and to say, like, do you think I'm not okay? Which obviously, looking back, obviously he knew I wasn't okay. But at the time, this was a revelation for me. And I said, do you think I'm not okay? And he said, I think you might not be, really doing super well at the moment. And I think, have you considered therapy or talking to someone about this? And I was like, oh, and I'd never considered this. First time in my life. And this was first year of PhD. So that was 2014. It's quite a while ago now. It was more than 10 years. And so then he was the reason I got into therapy, and then getting into therapy was the reason I tried a medication, and had a lot of resistance to that internally, even though I'm a neuroscientist and I should understand that a brain is an organ like any other organ. It can be sick like any other organ can be sick. So I didn't actually approach my supervisor. He approached me, and I would say that not everyone is going to have a supervisor that's that in tune, because maybe they haven't had the experiences that my supervisor had. But I would say it's always a good idea to speak to your supervisor. They may not be the perfect person and super understanding, and you want to find someone else to speak to, but they need to know what is going on with you as a student. And this is because we get a shocking number of students who get all the way to the end of their masters or their PhDs, and they are completely burnt out and they can't do the write-up, and they end up pulling out of the course when they've done all that work and they don't complete their PhD. And then the supervisors are all panicked and are all saying, what could we have done? What would have helped? And they're trying, but it's too late. And so your supervisor needs to know what's going on with you. And it also means it's an important step, because if you need to put in a medical leave of absence, which I decided not to do and actually wish that I had done, you can defer your studies by 6 months as a medical leave of absence, where you don't pay fees, everything is literally deferred, and it's authorized through a psychiatrist, and you have to get all the documents and things, but it just gives you that breathing room to get better without the pressures hanging over you of, I've got to finish this, my funding won't cover me, this won't cover me, this won't cover me. But if you're on a medical leave of absence, you have a piece of paper that you can point to that can really, really help. So I think it's really important you share with your supervisors, and supervisors should be understanding, and they should also be going for training as to how to be supervisors and how to be good for their students. And if you don't feel comfortable immediately with your supervisor, share with someone else in your lab. ideally someone older, because they've probably had a similar experience, to be honest. Yeah. I think everyone goes through something, some kind of mental health thing. Yeah.
No, I think that is quite helpful because I think for most students, it takes time to like not trust your supervisor, but speak to your supervisor about those kind of things. Because for most students, I would assume when you come through honors, your supervisor is the superior being that you see. And then sort of like when it comes to masters, and then they're like, no, call me by my first name, like, and it takes time for you to like remove the prof and just say Haley, and like, oh, okay, and it's sort of like an awkward moment for you.
Yeah.
So I think having someone to talk to, I feel like it's really important because it can get, academia is really daunting.
It really is.
And we are mostly stuck in this like high functioning mode whereby everything, you are sensitized now. Everything is just noise. Like, oh, it's normal for me to be tired.
You think that because everyone else is up and walking around, that they're all 100% fine.
Yes.
You're the one that's not. And there's the imposter syndrome as well. And actually, if you were to really speak to them, you'd find out tons of them are all going through.
Yeah. Okay. So then, were there any other contributors to the mental health struggle? So, because I'd assume as a student, you have, yes, your academics and all the imposter syndrome, all the deadlines and the pressure weighing down on you. But then also as a student, you have a life outside the lab.
Yeah.
You have bills to pay, maybe shortage in funding, and that can also take a toll on you.
Yeah.
And it can become too much.
Yeah. I would say definitely. I'd say financial pressure is something that's always been with me. I'm the first person in my family to go to university. My family could support me in undergrad, but pretty much post-grad, I was needed to be quite self-sufficient. And the financial pressure is hectic. It really hangs over you. So you're always kind of doing side hustles, dog sitting, cat sitting, house sitting, whatever you can do to kind of bring in extra money. I remember my first therapy session going to it and saying, so I'm totally fine. I've got an amazing relationship that he seems like he's the one. It's going to be, that's fine. Family stuff is totally fine. This is fine. I'm just a bit stressed about studies. And within 6 months, I had ended that relationship. I had figured out actually family dynamics are not okay. And I'm really not comfortable with, the relationships and how there's so much under the surface that I've just been ignoring. I basically had a whole life overhaul. Yeah. So not to say that that's going to be everyone's experience. So don't be afraid to go to therapy because you think your whole life will change. You will become more honest with yourself and you will be better for it. Really, you'll be actually happy as opposed to telling yourself that you're happy because you have these things. Financial was huge. I think relationship things that I didn't realize were an issue were actually a huge contributor as well. And then it was really my ability to regulate my own body and stress and expectations. I think particularly in PhD because it took me 5.5 years to do a PhD, and then you have that pressure of, but you're supposed to do it in 3 years. They only fund you for 3 years. All the rubrics say 3 years. And then you do 5.5 years and you're like, something's wrong with me. I'm not doing this fast enough. And you realize not all PhDs are the same. I was the first PhD student in my lab. We were setting up a lab from scratch with techniques for the first time in Africa, which we were having to fix ourselves because you can't just call the rep from the company because they're in Switzerland. And I actually would not trade that experience for the world because it taught me to be scrappy and to fix problems. But I had to step away from the comparison. Yeah, which was a big one.
I think, comparison is the thief of joy. So maybe if I can go back more on now if you're trying to look, do you think universities are aware of what students actually go through as they're pursuing their postgraduate studies? Yes. Particularly maybe in the concept of finances.
Oh, yeah.
So financial struggle, I'm not a victim, but I went through that.
But we're all victims,
It takes a toll on you. Yeah. So maybe if I look back into my honors last year, even though I had a full scholarship, because UCT is so expensive, I had a shortfall.
Yeah.
And then now it meant basically I had to now find side hustles for monthly allowances, groceries, toiletries, and all those things are expensive. And also now having to maintain a difficult project, a very technical, optimizing a protocol. And yeah, that's not a nice place to be at.
And also wanting to be a student and go out and have some drinks with your friends or whatever, just get to be a young person in university. And it's like really hard because some of your friends who maybe are out of undergraduate and working are saying, oh, come out with us. And you're like, oh, I just can't do this.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you think universities are aware of that, or could they be doing anything better in terms of like just trying to support students?
Yeah, look, I can speak from some angles. I would say that I think that a lot of supervisors, they're so far from the student experience themselves. And not only that, but when they were a student, the economy was better. Right? Realistically, like my parents are boomers. When they lived, the economy was just better.
Like I did a lot.
Barely afford 2 cats, and when my mom was my age, she had 2 children, and they were supporting a 4-person household on 1 income. That is just not realistic anymore. The economy has changed, and so that's also hitting students very, very hard. So I think that supervisors maybe underestimate, and I get very frustrated when labs do things like, okay, it's Christmas and we're all buying a Christmas gift for everyone, and I'm like, do you think students can afford that? Okay, no, maybe a Secret Santa and everyone buys one. But those kinds of concepts, I think they're just like a bit foreign to them if it's been a while. That said, I think a lot of supervisors are really well informed. I think the university certainly knows how much of a problem there is. I mean, we've had fees must fall and student fee related protest action for many, many years now. I think, they've heard the grievances of the students. I think what's difficult is that students are acting where they can act, which is the pressure on the universities, and really what we need is pressure on government. Not to absolve universities of responsibility. I absolutely think universities are responsible, and in fact, like at the Neuroscience Institute, where I'm the communications manager, we are very concerned about student financial support, and we're coming up with all kinds of creative ways to try and generate income streams that can then be used for student funding. So there's a lot of departments and groups that are doing a lot within the university structure, but I think it needs to go further, and it needs to go to government, because the students can't act on government, like that they're acting where they have power. So I think that there is a mismatch. The economy is terrible, there's a lot of pressures, and it's also just very hard because being a young person, you also kind of want to have that joie de vivre and be out and be young and be enjoying yourself. And I'm very aware of how doing a postgrad does make you feel set back. For instance, my sister is 2 years younger than me, but she studied for undergrad and went into advertising and has been working a lot longer than I have. And I was the perpetual student. And despite being the older one, I was always the one going, oh, can we, it's the parent presence. And, oh, do you mind if I put it? She's like, just put in this much and I'll put in the extra. And she's always, stepped in a financial role such that she totally feels like the older sister, because I was just the perpetual student who was always broke.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It does take a bit of time in academia to have that financial stability.
It does. And I also want to say also very clearly, like I had a lot of financial stress, but I can't even imagine, like this is compounded. This is a compounding issue. It's very intersectional, right? I do come from privilege and had a lot of assistance that other students also just didn't have. So they have it even worse than I did. Black tax is a real thing. There are people supporting whole families. There are people who are working, multiple jobs and studying and supporting people back home. And it's like people need to understand, and I hopefully that is becoming more aware, or the awareness about that is growing, because it's not the same for everyone.
It isn't. And maybe as we maybe close off this particular section, then what is one advice you'll give to someone who has that financial stress? For example, you're a student, you have shortfalls, so you're working on the side, you have a demanding project, you also support back at home, and your supervisor still doesn't want to give you flexible hours in the lab, so you sort of have to just try and make it work. What advice would you give to the student?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think so. I don't want to pretend that I know what that experience is exactly like. I have some idea of what it is like to live with financial stress, and I can only imagine how much worse it could be. One piece of advice I would give students, just in terms of in general approaching supervisors, is, and I think this applies to when you have the mental health chat with them as well, is to show up in your vulnerability and put that vulnerability out there. But if you can frame it in a way that says to the supervisor that you are a professional who is looking at this in a very reasonable way. So what I mean by that is, instead of going, I'm so depressed, you solve this for me, kind of because they're not going to respond well to that. And I'm just thinking about what is going to get the best result for the student. If you show up and you say, I've realized that I'm really not okay. Like, my mental health is really terrible. And it's become to a point where I'm really worried about it jeopardizing my studies. And I'm thinking long term here. And I'm thinking about how I can get through this degree and I want to give it my 100%. And I want to do my absolute best. And I want it to be something I'm proud of. But I need to take this seriously so that I can finish this thing properly. That is a way of communicating to a supervisor that you are an adult, you're making a responsible decision here, but you are saying that you need help. And in the same way, you can say, I get this much from, maybe you show up to them with a budget that you've created that looks really good. Like, you've put in the effort, you've shown exactly what you live on. Here are my living costs. This is what I'm getting from funding. This is what I'm getting from you. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for that amount. I am feeling really stressed out right now because my shortfall is this. And I know that I can beat that shortfall if I do XYZ, these jobs. But I need some flexible hours to do that. And I understand that you may not want me to do flexible hours. Is there another solution that you could help me with to kind of think about that could help me achieve that shortfall without the job that would, sort of make my hours tricky? So you put it to them. You say, you're the wise one with all the life experience. Here's it all laid out. What do you suggest I do? And go to them for that advice. And I think that way also just says you're responsible, you're showing up, you're not just whinging in their eyes, and that can be an effective way to kind of get them to communicate with you and to play ball. The one other piece of advice, and this comes from a book that my friend wrote, it's called How to Manage Your Money. Can I swear? Is that allowed? It's in the title. How to Manage Your Money Like a Fucking Grown Up is the book, right? I would advise you all read this book because it is written for the South African market. It is written for young people, and it takes all the, what does she call it? The finance bro language that is so terrifying, and it just cuts it out. And she writes in such a funny style. Her name's Sam Beck-Bessinger. She's wonderful. And she talks about having a side hustle, which I think most of us have these days, right? Yeah. And she has spoken to me specifically about make your side hustle like count. So there's the easy job to do where, you can be like me, often selling things secondhand, for people, helping my friends sell things secondhand, that kind of thing, which is a lot of time, a lot of effort for not a lot of profit, right? Or I can be making my degree count for me and doing something like editing scientific papers online for second language English speakers, where now I'm getting paid much better per hour. It's a much better use of my time. So it's about choosing the smartest side hustle you can for the level that you're at. Yeah. Just one piece of advice from Sam Beck-Bessinger, ladies and gentlemen.
That is really helpful. We'll drop the book down in there.
Okay.
Okay, cool. And then maybe let's take a shift.
Yes.
So I understand that also, like, when you're most of the time when in academia, it's easy, like neurodivergence is a thing. Most people get late diagnosis. And sometimes you find out like you dealing with mental health issues, probably ADHD, but then you build up this what can I say, building blocks and coping mechanisms that it ends up being like exhausting, and it's depression and it's anxiety. So maybe if you can comment on that, on like in your own experience, how much of that like had a big impact.
You read my mind. Blessing. Yes. I will also say our society glorifies busyness, right? So that takes total advantage of folks who are ADHD and just burns them out. It's just like, oh yeah, you want more, you want to do more, and then you crash, right? So this is a massive thing. And actually it was beginning of last year that I've expressed that I was anxious through a lot of my studies, but beginning of last year, I got diagnosed as ADHD. So that means autistic and ADHD. So incredibly neurodiverse over here. All of the spice, okay? It was an absolute revelation to me. I had no idea. But when I told friends, oh, I've been diagnosed as this, they were like, oh, I could have told you that. Or, oh, yeah, oh, no, obviously. I was like, would you have? Because it would have saved me so much of a headache.
Didn't you say anything?
Why didn't you? And I understand why. Because now being diagnosed, I can spot it in some other people. But it is not my right to diagnose them.
Yes.
I'm not a professional in that capacity. And a label isn't useful for everyone. It was very useful for me, very helpful for me. And I make a point of being very open about mental health things because I know how much that helped me. So I try to be very open about my diagnoses, but not everyone is like that, and that is fine. So for me, it was an absolute revelation. And what I've discovered in my reading and learning about ADHD and autism, and, you know, particularly in females, is that because it expresses extremely differently in females.
Yes.
We are often not caught when we're young.
Yes.
And so it goes unchecked for many, many years. And then it results in two things most commonly, either anxiety or depression, and then chronic pain, most commonly migraines, but also, you know, fibromyalgia, all these kinds of different kinds of chronic pain. And I had both of those. I had anxiety and I get terrible migraines. And so that's actually what led me to the diagnosis. The other thing that is just to mention that is very commonly co-occurring, I think predominantly in women who are neurodiverse, is hypermobility. So if you have very bendy fingers, just, you know, back of your head, it's now almost becoming a thing of if someone's hypermobile, you go, just have you considered neurodivergence? Because there's such a strong link there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, genomically they seem. The other thing that seems to be very linked is queerness, which, you know, I was like, should I reevaluate my sexuality? But I think that might be a confounder. I think that neurodivergent people tend to be much more open-minded. They've been shown to be very on the open-minded.
Yes.
And so maybe they are, of the queer people that are out of the closet, you know, that are open about who they are. And so it might be a confounding bias there. But what I will say is that the way it expresses in women and girls is hypersensitivity, hyper emotional. You're the type of person that is always sensing the emotional temperature of the room. You're trying to make sure that everyone in the room is getting along and is fine, and you feel responsible for all of the social interaction going on. But now the problem is that is missed in girls, because how do we raise girls? You need to check. You need to make sure that everyone is fine. Make sure everyone's feeling happy. Have they got a drink? Have you looked after them?
It's about everyone else.
Whereas the autistic boy is in the corner playing with a train set, not making eye contact. That's very obvious to people, but it's not obvious in girls. And so we get missed, and then we develop, like you said, miles and miles of coping strategies and what we call masking behaviors, where we learn, say, oh, when I say things, they are socially not acceptable and people judge me, so I'm going to keep quiet. So my masking is to just keep quiet in social situations. Or I can't really tell what kind of a situation this is, so I'm just going to assume this default. And that's a masking behavior. And then you go through this process as an adult, if you get diagnosed, where you start to try to unmask and you start to pick, well, what were coping strategies that were useful? Like, I'm a very organized person. So that's not a classic feature of ADHD. Often that's disorganization, but I think, you know, maybe my autism makes me very kind of OCD about, you know, being very stringent with organization, or maybe that's a strategy that I've developed because I've had to, and so I've gotten very good at it in a regimented way, but it didn't maybe come naturally to me, but that was so long ago that it does now, you know? So which of the coping strategies are useful and I want to keep, and which are actually harming me?
Is it okay for me to assume that it's probably difficult to unmask?
Totally. It's you know, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever fully unmask. I think, you know, and this is why I think you develop anxiety or depression and chronic pain, is because you end up shoving a lot of things down, just not listening to your body cues, not because you end up in social situations where your body goes into fight or flight mode, because it's like, what do I do? What do I do? I'm panicked. And you learn to shut those cues down, because you learn that it's not socially acceptable to be freaking out right now. It's just a conversation. Or there's too many stimuli. You're at a rugby game never have I ever, but say you're at a rugby game. I imagine there's lots of shouting and screaming, very overstimulating. For someone to just be like, I can't be here anymore, it's not really socially acceptable. People be like, oh, why did you leave? Oh, you're such a bummer. So you learn to shut down your body cues. And what that means is you literally, your body is trying to tell you things all the time. And they say that, I mean, this gets crazy, but UTIs are more common in neurodivergent women because you shut off your body cues to the point that you don't even know, I need to go to the loo. You can hyper focus on a task so much for say 2 hours. You come out of that, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm starving, I need to pee, I need to do this, I'm cold, I need to put on a jacket, I'm thirsty, and you've just shut down absolutely everything. They call it interoception. So it's a real thing.
There's definitely one you can all relate to, maybe in academia. Sometimes forget to eat because you're busy.
100%.
And then you're shaking or you're dizzy, like, oh shit, I didn't eat.
And it's I think that students have a certain there's a weird pride in, oh my gosh, I just did like 12 hours in the lab and I haven't eaten and I haven't done this, right? We all, it's like, it's so hard, and then you kind of want to get some affirmation from your peers or from others for how hard you're working, right? And so if you tell the story, or you don't look after yourself and you're like, oh, I did 12 hours in the lab and I haven't eaten and I didn't do this and I forgot my meds and I understand the getting the affirmation, and I think that that's fine. You can say I did 12 ruthless hours in the lab, but be prepared. You knew you were going to do 12 hours in the lab. Make sure you have food with you. Look after yourself. Like, keeping your body physiology like at some good level is really important to the success of your project, as important as it is to spend 12 hours in the lab if that's this big experiment you have to do. So like, there's no shame in looking after yourself and doing it well. And I've actually been told in the hectic times, like when you're writing up a thesis, the sort of wisdom is to treat yourself like a toddler. You put yourself to bed on time, you wake yourself up on time, you give yourself the meals, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so the not taking care of yourself and pushing yourself to your limit will only last for so long. And that has worked during high school, right? And it's worked in undergrad, right? But when you start getting to postgrad, you get to thesis,
it works short term, and then you eventually burn out.
And then you burn out. And then once you burn out, it is so slow getting back from burnout. Like, it can take you a year or 2 years to recover from burnout.
Really slow.
So it's better to take care of yourself in the beginning, even if it's a little bit slower. It's like the slow steady wins the race.
The turtle.
Turtle. Tortoise. Turtle, tortoise.
Okay. And then so I want to ask now, so then we're dealing with mental health challenges. Was there like a turning point whereby you're like, okay, I think I need to actually take care of my mental health? Was there a specific event that happened?
There was. I think there was that moment. I still remember being in the lab, and it was like late one afternoon. It was winter. I think it was starting to get dark, and just eventually saying those words to my supervisor, "Do you think I'm not okay?" And him saying, "Yeah," and he said yes. So, like, not too quickly, but pretty quickly, and so confidently that I was just aware of how not okay I was. And actually, that almost sent me into a bit of a depression. I mean, I was in a depression, but I think the realizing that I was so not okay sent me into like a bit of a wobble. And I found like the next few days, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. He was super understanding. And I was so weak that I couldn't even do the research and find a therapist. So I asked my family for help, and my dad found me a therapist who I then dragged myself to see. And then that was when I started to go like, okay, I can get better. And I would say I'm not I don't tend towards depression naturally. I tend towards anxiety naturally. But as has been explained to me by my psychiatrist, a brain that is in an anxious state for a prolonged period of time, aka my master's, will eventually become a depressed brain, because it shuts you down. Because the brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body, as we both know very well. Yes. It's 2% of the body mass. It takes 20% of the resources. So, if you're not functioning, if it's not functioning, it's going to put you down. Just to rest. So that was a turning point for me. I think I had another turning point, not really in my own journey of recognizing depression, but in recognizing the the larger scale of the problem, if I can share that as well. So I mentioned I took a part-time job during my PhD. We had someone take early retirement, and so I became the interim manager of the histology lab, which I did not have experience in at all. So this then became a real problem for any PhD progress. But for about 8 months, I was working as part of now sort of kind of staff, but I was still a PhD student. So I was sort of in this dual role. And this would have been somewhere between 2018, 2019, and sometime around then. And we had a very inspiring dean at the medical school who a lot of people will know very well and have very fond memories of. This is Professor Bongani Mayosi. And I mean, it's quite well known that during this time, tragically, and this was sort of after the first 2 or 3 years of Fees Must Fall, and I'll explain why that's relevant, he took his own life. And to have someone in such a high position, but not only that, he was such a man of the students. You know, he was incredible. He was this prominent Black academic. So he was someone that our young Black students could identify with in this amazing position of power where he had worked his way up. He had incredible research. He had incredible teaching, and I believe incredible time for students. Everyone who knew him very closely, I've just heard the most wonderful things about him. So it was a real knock to both the academic community, or the staff, let's say, and the students. And there were vigils at medical school that were incredibly moving and sad. I mean, students just bawling their eyes out. It was a very, very hard time. And I was sort of in that semi-staff role at the time. And what it did was it made staff, UCT at large, aware of is that until that point, you could only receive mental health services on upper campus. You couldn't receive them if you happened to be on Med campus. You had to travel to upper campus. And there was no mental health support for staff at all. I believe I'm right in saying that. And so that event alone meant a number of things happened, but significantly for medical school was that mental health support for students was then present on campus, not just around the time of the event, but ongoing. And then mental health support for staff became a thing at UCT. And so obviously, some good, we managed to take some lessons from that. But what we did in the human biology department was we usually have a seminar. We were due to have a seminar, and then this happened, and we were like, we need to change the focus of the seminar. And so I suggested, because I happened to be on staff at the time, that my supervisor tell his mental health journey story, and that then I follow and tell mine, with the message being that because this academic was so willing to be vulnerable and open about his story, I was able to recognize that I wasn't okay and to get the help that I needed. And so we all need to talk about mental health a lot more, because there are so many people suffering in silence. No one knew that Prof. Mayosi was in that place. And it was that shock of realizing that, mental health doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone, even those in like incredible positions. And the only reason I mentioned the Fees Must Fall was because he was one of the reasons that the medical school, we had protests and we had action, but it was much more subdued here. And actually, I think there was even complaints leveled at the students on Med campus, but I think they were fairly unfounded, because from what I saw, the students were incredible. They had, a list of demands. They occupied the dean's suite. Prof. Mayosi, received those demands. Those demands were met with a return of, here's each demand, here's your contact person for that, here's the time frame over which we're going to approach it, and here's what we plan to do. And so there was proper dialogue between students and staff. It was really incredible to see. And Prof. Mayosi was at the center of that. He was absolutely instrumental in that incredible dialogue with the students happening, where the students felt respected. The staff were finding the students to be incredibly, upstanding, responsible. They were just wonderful. Not to say the students on upper campus weren't. They were doing amazing jobs as well. It's a complicated time, and there were always some bad actors at play. But for the most part, Med campus, we saw this incredible thing. And I think credit for that is due to Prof. Mayosi. But I think that the pressure of being that interlocutor, of playing that mediating role, was obviously taking a toll on him. I don't know. I'm speculating here. I don't know if that was a major thing, but I think it just was such a painful time because it had been a few years of Fees Must Fall and this incredible emotional outpouring of, frustration and sadness and grief from students about that. And then we were hit with this. And it was just about realizing, wow, yeah, like it's not just the students that are also not okay. It's everybody. We need to be looking at everybody. And that's why when we said, can you always spot mental health problems?
You can't always.
You can't.
Yeah.
No, you can't.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Mental health, it affects everyone.
It really does.
Staff and students.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So having went through that and now not that you solved your mental health issues, but you're dealing with them.
Constant battle. Constant work. Yeah, exactly.
Like I would say now being a staff member, because of that experience, has it changed the way you interact or show up for students?
Definitely. But I think it changed the way I interacted with students, because when you get to postgrad, the PhD students are often mentoring the younger students, the master students are mentoring the honors students, and so on. So right from when I got over my first kind of real hurdle of that really intense depressed episode and I got back into the lab and working and things, I made a point of deciding that I would be incredibly honest and open about my mental health things. And even in situations where it wasn't directly asked of me, but there was, a relevant comment that could be made, I would make the comment because I wanted to create an environment where students knew, I can speak to you. You're a safe person to speak to. And I've had many students come and speak to me over the years, and I've always felt incredibly privileged that they would be vulnerable with me. And that lab that I was in also continues to be an incredibly safe space for mental health things, and is better for it. The students are better for it. The success of the lab is better for it. It actually only benefits the lab. So I think it has changed that way, and I'm also very open about my ADHD diagnosis, which I remember being a little nervous about that at first, because some people, there's a lot of stigma around autism and ADHD, and people assume things, and would they maybe assume that then I can't do my job properly?
Yes.
And that is tricky and a risk, and I'm not saying I would necessarily bring it up in a job interview, but I had luckily been in the position a good number of years. I have incredible team who really believe in me, and so I felt very comfortable just being like, this is me, and I can talk about it. It's not the same for everyone, and if you don't have that at work, have an outlet where you can speak about that.
You need support.
I would love to have actually it become more of a thing, because actually it turns out that in academia there are a ton of neurodivergent folks. We're all there, not to say everyone is neurodivergent, but we tend to gravitate towards it, and so because we're all surrounded by other neurodivergent folks, we don't realize that we're not neurotypical.
It is a problem.
Exactly. Like if I was hanging out with surrounded by other, I would maybe go, oh yes, I'm definitely neurodivergent, but I had no idea. So I would actually really love to have more talks around that kind of thing, because I think it might help people solve medical things that are going on, anxiety that won't respond to medication in the way that you wanted to,
definitely.
Chronic pain, and then if you have that missing piece of the puzzle, that was very helpful for me.
I think I love what you mentioned in that you started opening up to the junior students in the lab. Because I think as junior students, you tend to not cherry pick, but you tend to read the room like, okay, can I talk to Haley? Haley's Crosby, I can't talk to Haley about this. But I feel like when you see the senior students being vulnerable, and then okay, I can actually talk to this person when I have problems. And I think absolutely it needs to be normalized talking about mental health, because also, it benefits the lab. A divergent team, totally more success rather than just having people that are just,
and in all ways, right? So neurodivergent, neurotypical, different races, different genders, different gender diversity,
is very important.
Sexual orientation, whatever it is, you benefit from having everyone in the room.
Absolutely. Okay. So maybe as we are closing off, a few more questions. Okay. So if you were to look at the camera and think of that as young Haley,
what
message would you have for young Haley?
Go get yourself tested for neurodivergence. No, I mean, definitely that. I think that would have been very helpful. If I look back at my undergraduate, I would tell my younger self to relax and enjoy it more.
Okay.
Yeah. To not, it sounds, the small stuff feels big at the time, but when you look back on it, you're like, that's small stuff. Study and things, that absolutely, I'm not saying don't work hard, but also just be more present in the moment. And they say this about anxiety is you're living in the future, you're not living in the moment. And I would just be like, try to live more in the moment and soak up and enjoy those moments. You're standing on campus and you're surrounded by these beautiful, ivy covered buildings, and you're chatting with your friends and the sun is shining and it's lovely. And instead of stressing about the test that you're going to study for later, just be in the moment,
That is true. I think one of my mentors said to me, we tend to get focused on like the end goal and just getting things done, that we never pause to enjoy the journey and just be present.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. You've set aside the study time. That's when you're going to stress.
Yeah, for now, focus on the coffee or the gossip.
Exactly, 100%.
Okay, cool. Maybe as a closing question.
Yeah.
So, what's one thing that you now know that you wish you had known back then?
Ooh, one thing. Oh, there's so many things. Hindsight is 20/20, and you can tell I need spectacles. So, I think knowing like it will work out. That the path isn't linear. It's going to take lots of twists and turns, but like it will work out. Like you'll figure it out, because you get so worried about like this test determining this thing, and if that doesn't work, then that won't work, then that won't work. And there are actually many paths, and what you're learning isn't only the content of what you're learning life skills and adaptability and how to think about your skills as transferable. You're learning all these things. In fact, probably for a lot of students, the job they're going to do doesn't exist yet. I mean, that's the times we're living in. So, think less about like the knowledge content of what you know, and think about the skills you're gaining, and actually realize that you are a lot more resilient than you think you are. Yeah.
There you have it, folks. You are a lot. I think that's a take-home message. You're a lot more resilient than you know.
Yeah.
So I think thank you so much, Haley, for being vulnerable, sharing your journey.
Yeah. Thank you for creating the safe space for all the vulnerability, all the feels. Thank you.
Yes, because I feel like we need to normalize talking about these topics, because people act like mental health is not a thing, and it's really like a big thing.
It's massive.
And I hope everyone at home, please take care of yourself. Remember to be kind. Have some grace. Yes, a master's is 2 years, but have some grace on yourself.
Eat your meals,
Eat meals, healthy meals. Foods, exercise. If you need therapy, also get a therapist.
Therapy's the best. Like, it's such a hack. You get to be so cool in therapy. Yeah.
I'm also getting therapy, guys, my first time, and I think it's really helping me out.
It's amazing.
But anyways, thank you so much. Until next time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Bye.